Eager for a fresh start, the Harris family moves to Hollowbrook Street. But neighbor Harold Baker's racist hostility greets them. When daughter Zara screams about a man in her room and a mysterious shoe appears, fear takes over. Even after Baker's arrest, hate mail arrives. Will the family ever truly be safe in this divided neighborhood? Hey everyone, welcome to Worldly Whispers. Let's get started. The Harris family, Malcolm, Rachel, and their 8-year-old daughter Zara, were filled with a mix of excitement and anticipation as they made their way to their new home on Hollowbrook Street in the peaceful suburbs of Stonefields. The allure of a fresh start, a place where Zara could grow up in safety and happiness, had been a driving force behind their decision to relocate. The moving day finally arrived, and a small but sturdy moving truck rumbled up in front of the 2-story house at 1423 Hollowbrook Street. Malcolm, with his trim build and kind eyes, stepped out of the family car. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility and the promise of a new beginning. Rachel, her teacher's instincts kicking in immediately, emerged from the passenger side. Her gaze swept over the neighborhood, assessing it for any signs of potential danger, a natural response ingrained from years of looking out for the well-being of her students and now, her own family. Zara, full of youthful exuberance, practically bounced out of the back seat. Her braids swung wildly as she twirled around, her eyes wide with wonder as she took in the sight of their new abode and the surrounding houses. In her young mind, this new place was a canvas waiting to be filled with adventures, friends, and countless happy memories. Just then, Roger, the portly landlord in his 60s, came ambling over. He had a friendly smile on his face, and his eyes crinkled at the corners as he extended his hand to Malcolm. "Welcome to Hollowbrook Street," he said in a warm tone. "I'm Roger, your landlord." Malcolm shook his hand firmly, introducing himself, Rachel, and Zara. As they chatted, Roger casually mentioned that the previous tenant, Mr. Thompson, had passed away in the house a few months back. "Natural causes," he assured them. "He was well into his 80s. Nothing to worry about, just good memories of a kind old man." Zara, with her vivid imagination, immediately piped up, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. "Was he a ghost?" she asked. Roger let out a hearty chuckle. No ghosts here, little one. Just the echoes of a life well lived." As the family resumed unpacking, Malcolm noticed a figure standing in the neighboring yard. It was Harold Baker, a middle-aged white man. His arms were crossed, and he was glaring at the Harris family with an intensity that was hard to ignore. Malcolm, feeling a bit uncomfortable under his stare, straightened up and wiped the sweat from his brow. He considered waving, but there was something in Harold's demeanor that made him hesitate. Harold's eyes seemed cold and unwelcoming. After a while, as twilight began to settle over Hollowbrook Street, Harold finally decided to approach. His footsteps were slow and deliberate, and his lips were curled into a smile that seemed more like a sneer. "Evening," he said, his voice dripping with false cordiality. "Harold Baker. I live next door." Malcolm nodded, extending his hand in a gesture of friendliness. "Malcolm Harris. Nice to meet you, Mr. Baker." But Harold ignored the outstretched hand. His eyes roved over Malcolm, then Rachel, and finally landed on Zara, who had come to stand beside her father. "So, you're the new people here, huh?" Harold chuckled, but there was no warmth in the sound. "I guess things are really going downhill now." Malcolm felt his shoulders tense at the comment, but he tried to keep his voice level. "Excuse me?" Harold's smirk widened. "The man who lived here before, he was one of us. A good man, respected in the community. Now well, I guess his legacy is about to get tainted. This neighborhood doesn't need trouble." Rachel, sensing the hostility, stepped forward, her arm protectively around Zara's shoulders. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Mr. Baker, but we're here to be part of this community, not cause trouble." Harold scoffed. "This place isn't for people like you. I mean the old man, he'd roll in his grave if he knew. But I guess that's how it goes. They move in, and everything falls apart." Malcolm felt a surge of anger rising within him, but he tamped it down, acutely aware of Zara's wide-eyed stare. "Mr. Baker, I think it's best if you leave now. We've had a long day, and we'd like to finish settling in." Harold's eyes narrowed, but then, unexpectedly, he turned to Zara and smiled. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it sent a chill down Malcolm's spine. There was something about that smile, a hint of malice that Malcolm couldn't quite place. As Harold turned to leave, he called over his shoulder, "Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of each other." The family watched in silence as Harold disappeared into his house. Once he was gone, Malcolm knelt down to Zara's level. "Hey, sweetheart, why don't you go inside and start unpacking your room? Mom and I will be right there to help. Zara nodded, her usual exuberance dampened by the tense encounter. Malcolm turned to Rachel, his expression grim. We didn't move here to make friends, Rachel said softly, squeezing Malcolm's hand. We're here for Zara, for her future. We can handle this. Malcolm nodded, forcing a smile. You're right. It's just one difficult neighbor. We've faced worse. As they headed inside to join their daughter, Malcolm couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his gut. They had chosen this neighborhood for its reputation as a safe, family-friendly community. The well-manicured lawns, the picket fences, and the quiet streets had all seemed so inviting. But now, beneath this idyllic exterior, Malcolm sensed an undercurrent of tension, a hostility that he had not anticipated. He wondered if they had made a mistake in moving here, if this seemingly perfect neighborhood was not as welcoming as they had hoped. But he pushed these thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand, making their new house a home for their family. The first night in their new home, the Harris family, exhausted from the move, hoped for a peaceful slumber. Malcolm and Rachel quickly drifted off, lulled by the unfamiliar creaks and settling sounds of the house. However, their tranquility was short-lived. In the dead of night, a piercing scream jolted Malcolm and Rachel awake. Their hearts pounding, they immediately recognized the sound as Zara's. Without hesitation, they raced down the hallway towards her room. Malcolm burst through the door first, flicking on the light. Zara was sitting upright in her bed, her eyes wide with terror, tears streaming down her face. Rachel rushed to her side, gathering the trembling child in her arms. "Baby, what's wrong? Did you have a bad dream?" she asked, stroking Zara's hair. Zara vehemently shook her head. "There was a man in my room, Mommy. He was standing right there," she cried, pointing a shaking finger towards the foot of her bed. Malcolm's instincts kicked in. He quickly scanned the room, checking behind the door, in the closet, and under the bed. He even went to the window to ensure it was locked. But there was no sign of an intruder. The room was exactly as they had left it before Zara went to sleep. "There's no one here, sweetie," Malcolm said gently, returning to sit on the edge of the bed. "It must have been a bad dream." Zara, still visibly shaken, refused to believe it. "No, Daddy. He was real. He was standing there watching me. I saw him," she insisted. Malcolm and Rachel exchanged worried glances. Rachel hugged Zara tighter, rocking her gently. "It's okay, baby. You're safe now. Mommy and Daddy are here." As Zara's sobs began to subside, Malcolm tried to make sense of what had happened. Could someone have actually been in the room? But how? The windows were locked, and the house had seemed secure. Then, he remembered the story the landlord had told them about the previous tenant. "Zara, honey," he said softly, "do you remember earlier when the landlord told us about the old man who used to live here?" Zara nodded, hiccuping slightly. "Well, sometimes when we hear stories like that, especially in a new place, our imagination can play tricks on us. Maybe that's what happened tonight. Your mind created an image of the old man because you were thinking about the story." Zara seemed to consider this for a moment. "Maybe," she said uncertainly. Rachel gave Malcolm a grateful look. "Your dad's right, sweetie. Moving to a new place can be scary, and sometimes our minds create things that aren't really there. But you're safe here with us, okay?" Zara nodded again, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Can you stay with me until I fall asleep?" she asked. "Of course," Rachel said, settling in beside her daughter. She looked up at Malcolm. "You should go back to bed. You have work in the morning." Malcolm hesitated, torn between his desire to comfort his daughter and the nagging worry in the back of his mind. Finally, he nodded, leaning down to kiss Zara's forehead. "Good night, princess. Sweet dreams." As he walked back to their bedroom, Malcolm couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He tried to rationalize it away, telling himself that Zara was just unsettled in the new environment. The story about the previous tenant, combined with the stress of the move and the encounter with their neighbor, was enough to give anyone nightmares. But as he lay in bed, staring at the unfamiliar shadows on the ceiling, he couldn't help but question their decision to move. The next 2 days passed in a blur of unpacking and trying to establish a sense of normalcy. But each night, Zara woke up screaming, claiming that the man had returned. On the third night, Malcolm and Rachel sat at the kitchen table, their mugs of coffee growing cold. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, a reminder of another sleepless night. "We have to do something," Malcolm said, his voice low and strained. "This can't go on." "She's terrified." Rachel sighed, running a hand through her disheveled hair. "I know, but what can we do? We've checked the room 100 times. There's no one there." Malcolm suggested installing cameras or calling the police. Rachel was hesitant. "The police, Malcolm? We can't. You know how that would look." A black family new to the neighborhood calling the police because their daughter had a nightmare. Malcolm's jaw clenched. This isn't just a nightmare, Rachel. She describes him the same way every time. An older white man standing at the foot of her bed, watching her. What if someone is actually getting into our daughter's room? Rachel reached across the table, taking Malcolm's hand. Listen to yourself, honey. How could someone be getting in? The windows are locked, and we have an alarm system. It's not possible. But Malcolm was insistent. What if it is? What if there's even a small chance that it's true? What horrible things could this man be doing in our daughter's room? Rachel flinched at the implication. Don't even think like that. Zara's fine. Shaken up, yes, but physically fine. This has to be a phase brought on by the stress of moving. Before they could continue their argument, Zara appeared in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Mommy, Daddy, I can't sleep, she said. Rachel immediately went to her, kneeling down. What's wrong, baby? Another bad dream? Zara shook her head. No, I'm scared to go to sleep. I don't want the man to come back. Malcolm's heart ached at the fear in his daughter's voice. He joined Rachel, placing a comforting hand on Zara's shoulder. Sweetheart, remember what we talked about? Sometimes our imagination can play tricks on us. Zara nodded hesitantly. Malcolm continued, choosing his words carefully. Do you think maybe that's what's happening here? That maybe you're not really seeing a man, but just imagining it because you're in a new place and feeling a little scared? Zara thought for a moment. Maybe, she said slowly. Maybe you're right, Daddy. I'm not totally sure anymore. Malcolm and Rachel exchanged a look of surprise and relief. That's okay, sweetheart, Rachel said soothingly. It's normal to feel unsure sometimes, especially in a new place. The important thing is that you're safe here with us. Zara nodded, some of the tension leaving her small frame. Can I sleep with you tonight? She asked. Rachel hesitated, looking at Malcolm. Given the circumstances, Malcolm said, Of course, just for tonight. As they settled into bed with Zara between them, Malcolm still couldn't shake the nagging doubt. Had Zara really just been imagining things, or was there something more sinister at play? The following evening, after tucking Zara into bed with extra hugs and reassurances, Malcolm found himself lying awake, his thoughts a jumbled mess. He had spent the day researching security cameras, torn between his desire to safeguard his family and the worry that he might be overreacting. The rational part of his mind told him that Zara's fears were likely a result of an overactive imagination, spurred by the stress of moving and the unpleasant encounter with their neighbor, Harold Baker. However, his instincts, honed by life experiences, wouldn't let go of the nagging feeling that something was seriously wrong. As the digital clock on the nightstand ticked over to midnight, Malcolm quietly slid out of bed, careful not to wake Rachel. He padded softly down the hallway, pausing outside Zara's room. Pressing his ear against the door, he listened intently, expecting to hear Zara's frightened whimpers. But there was only silence. Just as he was about to return to bed, a faint sound, barely audible, caught his attention. It was a whisper of movement from within Zara's room. His heart started pounding so loudly that he was certain it would wake the whole house. With trembling fingers, he grasped the doorknob and turned it slowly to avoid making any noise. In one swift motion, he pushed the door open and flicked on the light switch. Zara, he called out, his voice tight with fear. The room was exactly as they had left it earlier. Zara's favorite stuffed animals were neatly arranged at the foot of her bed. Her bookshelf stood undisturbed, and the window was firmly shut and locked. Zara was sound asleep in her bed, her chest rising and falling steadily. Malcolm let out a shaky sigh of relief and moved quietly to Zara's bedside. He gently brushed a stray curl from her forehead. She stirred slightly at his touch, but didn't wake. As he turned to leave, a shadow on Zara's dresser caught his eye. His gaze darted to the window, expecting to see a figure. But there was nothing there, just the branches of the old oak tree in the backyard swaying gently in the night breeze. Malcolm shook his head, chiding himself for his paranoia. He was letting his imagination run wild, seeing threats in every shadow. The next morning, Malcolm was woken up by Zara's urgent call. Dad! Dad! Come quick! Her voice was filled with a mix of fear and excitement. Malcolm rushed upstairs, his heart pounding. He found Zara standing in the doorway of her room, still in her pajamas. Dad, the man was here again. He left something, she said, her voice quavering. Malcolm knelt down to Zara's level, placing his hands on her shoulders. What do you mean, sweetie? What did he leave? Instead of answering, Zara took his hand and led him into her room. Malcolm's eyes scanned the room, looking for any signs of disturbance. Everything seemed in place until Zara pointed to the floor near her closet. There, she said. He left that. Malcolm's breath caught in his throat. On the soft beige carpet sat a single brown leather shoe. It was well worn, the kind of shoe an older man might wear, and definitely not anyone's in their family. For a long moment, Malcolm just stared at the shoe, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. This couldn't be real. It had to be a mistake or a prank. Just then, Rachel entered the room, sensing something was wrong. "Malcolm, what's going on?" she asked, her brow furrowed. Malcolm turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Rachel, call the police." Rachel's eyes widened as she took in the scene. Malcolm kneeling on the floor, Zara clutching his arm, and the mysterious shoe. Without a word, she nodded and hurried downstairs to make the call. Malcolm turned back to Zara, trying to keep his voice calm. "Sweetie, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Did you see the man this time?" Zara shook her head, her lower lip trembling. "No, Daddy. I woke up, and it was just there. But I know it was him, the man who's been watching me." Malcolm pulled her into a tight hug, his mind racing. How could someone have gotten in and out without them noticing? They had an alarm system, locked windows, and he had been awake for part of the night. The police arrived soon after. Their presence drew curious glances from the neighbors. Malcolm watched as they bagged the shoe as evidence, asked questions, and took notes. He answered as best he could, trying to convey the fear and uncertainty that had been plaguing their family. One of the officers, while examining Zara's window, asked Malcolm if he had noticed anything unusual from the direction of the neighbor's house. Malcolm's heart skipped a beat as he remembered Harold Baker's strange behavior, his hostile welcome, his ominous warnings, and that creepy smile he had given Zara. "Officer," Malcolm said, his voice low and urgent, "I think I might know who's responsible for this. Our neighbor, Harold Baker. He's been less than welcoming since we moved in. He made some comments that made us uncomfortable." The officer's eyebrows raised slightly. "Is that so? Well, Mr. Harris, given this new evidence, we'd better have a chat with Mr. Baker. Would you be willing to accompany us?" Malcolm nodded, a mix of determination and apprehension coursing through him. As they prepared to leave, he caught Rachel's eye. She gave him a small, tight nod, silently showing her support and her own fear. As they approached Harold Baker's immaculately maintained front yard, Malcolm couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between the seemingly perfect exterior and the ugliness he suspected lay within. The well-manicured lawn and the carefully pruned rose bushes gave an air of normalcy, yet Malcolm felt that it was all a facade, hiding something far more sinister. Officer Jenkins, the older of the two policemen, took the lead as they reached the front door. He knocked firmly, the sound echoing in the quiet morning air. For a moment, there was no response, and Malcolm felt a mix of relief and frustration. But then, the sound of footsteps approached from inside, and the door swung open, revealing Harold Baker. He was dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and slacks, as if he were expecting company. His eyes narrowed as they swept over the officers, and then widened slightly in feigned surprise when they landed on Malcolm. "Well, well," Baker drawled, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "To what do I owe this pleasure?" Officer Jenkins stepped forward, his demeanor professional but stern. "Mr. Baker, I'm Officer Jenkins, and this is Officer Rodriguez. We're here to ask you a few questions about some disturbances reported by your neighbors, the Harris family." Baker's eyebrows shot up in feigned innocence. "Disturbances? I'm sure I don't know what you mean. I've been nothing but welcoming to our new neighbors." The pause before the last word was barely noticeable, but Malcolm felt his fists clench at his sides. Officer Rodriguez spoke up, her voice calm but authoritative. "Mr. Baker, we have reason to believe that someone has been entering the Harris home without permission, specifically into their daughter's room. Would you happen to know anything about that?" Baker's face remained impassive, but Malcolm noticed a slight twitch in his left eye. "That's a serious accusation, officer. I'm just a peaceful resident here, minding my own business. I certainly haven't seen anyone suspicious hanging around." Malcolm couldn't contain himself any longer. "What about you, Baker? Have you been hanging around our house, terrorizing our daughter?" Baker's eyes flashed with anger, but he quickly composed himself. "I don't know what you're implying, Mr. Harris, but I suggest you be very careful about throwing around baseless accusations." Officer Jenkins held up a hand, silencing both men. "Mr. Baker, we have evidence that suggests someone has indeed been in the Harris home. A shoe was left behind in their daughter's room." As Officer Jenkins spoke, Officer Rodriguez produced a photo of the brown leather shoe they had found in Zara's room. Baker's reaction was subtle, a slight widening of the eyes, a barely perceptible intake of breath. But it was enough for Malcolm to notice. "Does this shoe look familiar to you, Mr. Baker?" Officer Rodriguez asked, her tone neutral but her gaze piercing. Baker shook his head perhaps a bit too quickly. I've never seen that shoe before in my life, and I resent the implication that I would have anything to do with this. This alleged break-in. Malcolm opened his mouth to argue, but Officer Jenkins shot him a warning look. The officer turned back to Baker, his voice level but firm. Mr. Baker, given the seriousness of these allegations and the evidence we've uncovered, we're going to need to take a look around your property. Do you consent to a search, or will we need to obtain a warrant? Baker's face flushed red, his composure finally cracking. This is outrageous. You can't just come here and accuse me of what? Breaking into a child's room? I'm a respected member of this community. Officer Rodriguez interjected, Mr. Baker, we're not accusing you of anything at this point. We're simply following up on evidence in an ongoing investigation. Now, will you consent to a search of your property? For a long moment, Baker stood silent, his gaze darting between the officers and Malcolm. Finally, he stepped back from the doorway, his movements stiff with barely suppressed anger. Fine, search away. You won't find anything, because there's nothing to find. As the officers entered the house, Malcolm hung back. His heart was pounding as he watched Baker retreat to his living room and sink into an armchair with a huff. The man's bravado seemed to have deflated somewhat, replaced by a nervous energy that manifested in the constant tapping of his foot against the hardwood floor. Officer Jenkins began methodically searching the ground floor, while Officer Rodriguez headed upstairs. Malcolm remained near the front door, his eyes never leaving Baker. The tension in the room was palpable, the silence broken only by the sound of drawers opening and closing and footsteps creaking on the floor above. Minutes seemed to stretch into hours as Malcolm's mind raced with possibilities. What if they didn't find anything? What if this was all some horrible misunderstanding? Or worse, what if Baker had managed to hide or dispose of any evidence? Just as the doubt began to overwhelm him, Officer Rodriguez's voice rang out from upstairs. Jenkins, you need to see this. Baker's head snapped up, his face draining of color. Malcolm felt a surge of vindication mixed with horror. Whatever the officers had found, it was clear that Harold Baker was not the innocent, respectable neighbor he claimed to be. As Officer Jenkins and Officer Rodriguez came downstairs, Officer Rodriguez held a brown leather shoe in her gloved hand, an exact match to the one found in Zara's room. Malcolm felt a wave of nausea. It was all true. Officer Jenkins stepped forward, his voice tight with anger. Mr. Baker, would you care to explain this? Baker's eyes darted around, and finally, his shoulders sagged in defeat. I don't know what came over me, he muttered. Malcolm surged forward, fists clenched. You terrorized my daughter. You invaded our home. Why? Because we're black. Officer Rodriguez placed a restraining hand on Malcolm's shoulder. Mr. Baker, you're under arrest for breaking and entering. We'll be looking into additional charges. As Jenkins read Baker his rights, Baker seemed to crumple. You don't understand. This neighborhood. It's all I have left. I thought if I scared you enough, you'd leave. Malcolm was furious. You thought terrorizing a child was the answer? The police led Baker out of the house. Neighbors, who had started to gather, whispered among themselves. Malcolm saw the shock and shame on their faces. Sarah Thompson, a neighbor, stepped forward. Malcolm, we're so sorry. We should have been more welcoming. We didn't see what was happening. Tom Chin, another neighbor, nodded. We thought this was a perfect community, but we were blind to the ugliness. Your family is welcome here. Malcolm felt a lump in his throat. Thank you. That means a lot. He went back home. Rachel and Zara were waiting. Zara looked up at her parents. Is Mr. Baker going to jail? She asked. Rachel pulled Zara onto her lap. Mr. Baker did something very wrong, and he might go to jail. But the important thing is you're safe now. Malcolm explained to Zara that Baker was afraid of change and people who were different. But being different isn't bad, Rachel added. We have to stand up to this kind of behavior. The news of Baker's arrest spread quickly. The community, once divided, started to come together. Town hall meetings were organized to discuss inclusivity. The school district reviewed its curriculum to include diverse perspectives. The Harris family, though still shaken, became part of a community action group. They worked with local officials to strengthen anti-discrimination laws and with schools to promote diversity. The trial of Harold Baker was a long and tense process. The Harris family's testimonies were powerful. Zara's account of her fear moved many in the courtroom. Baker's defense tried to paint him as a misguided man, but the evidence was overwhelming. In the end, Baker was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to prison. Even after the trial, the Harris family faced some challenges. They received hate mail, but they also had the support of many in the community. Malcolm and Rachel, along with others, continued their work for a more inclusive neighborhood. When Baker's house went on the market, the community decided to welcome the new family wholeheartedly, regardless of their background. Malcolm and Rachel felt a sense of closure. They knew that their fight had not been in vain. They had not only protected their family, but also helped bring about positive change in the community. As they sat at the dinner table one evening, Malcolm looked around at his family. The fear that had haunted them for so long had finally receded. They had found their place in this community, and they were ready to move forward, stronger and more united.
If this story touched you, show your support by liking and subscribing. Your encouragement helps us keep sharing memorable stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.